Hi friends, we at GLC would like to take a quick moment to thank you for watching our programs on this platform, and we'd like to ask you for a little favor. Would you please go beneath this video and click the subscribe button? Did you know that by simply subscribing to the GLC YouTube channel, you can help us financially support the programs on this platform? You'll need to be signed into YouTube beforehand, but if not, simply click the subscribe button and YouTube will automatically walk you through the steps to sign in or to create an account. By taking these simple steps, you will not only ensure that you continue to receive our unique programming and gain instant access to the hundreds of videos we post, but more importantly, you'll also be telling YouTube that GLC's content is worth watching and promoting. Likewise, if you enjoyed a specific program, please click the thumbs up button below, which also helps inform YouTube that this is a program worth recommending. Finally, once you have logged in and subscribed, please click the notification bell below in order to receive announcements when we post new content. As usual, feel free to post your questions and comments in the comments section below. We always love hearing from our friends and viewers. Again, thank you for watching and supporting God's Learning Channel. We couldn't spread the message of the gospel without you. Be blessed, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Come back to the end, revealed out of the beginning. We are in a long series, because there's a lot of chapters in Acts, called The Church in the Book of Acts. I think more appropriately called His Assembly in the book of Acts. And when we left off last time, we were talking about, actually, the context was pin-headed theologians and pointy-headed intellectuals, if you remember. And I was just giving some as a matter of fact, I'm going to give some examples, but one of the things I wanted to address is in Matthew 16, verse 18, for example, where sometimes I believe our culture is forced into the text rather than the other way around. And there's lots of other examples. For example, Easter. You know, you read in the book of Acts and it says Easter in it. Well, obviously there was no Easter biblically. You know, there's Passover. As a matter of fact, the Greek word there is Pascha. It's Passover. Pesach in the Hebrew, Pascha in the Greek there, and that they translate it as a word that we call it today, or have for several hundred years now. And so they force that into the text. That's, you know, it's a mutilation. It's not even close to a translation. And those kind of things are an example of what I'm talking about. But now that we've seen that Yeshua warns us that, that his body's going to be divided through the house of Israel and the house of Judah, that's why he lifted up the cup at the Passover and said, this is the new covenant. And so he starts the process of what? Elijah's ministry, restoring all things. And eventually, by bringing the house of Israel and the house of Judah back into the land, bringing all the exiles back in the land. And the way it's been in the past, the pattern in the past, is going to be the same in the future. That's why Isaiah tells us that. And that is when they're scattered, when he brings them back together, when they come out, it's all of those who are from the loins of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, literally from Jacob, Israel, and all those who join themselves with them. That's Ezekiel chapter 37. And so when they all come out, they're all one people. They will make of two, one fold with one shepherd, John chapter 10 says. And so there's a gathering process that needs to take place first. I think our Messiah has been gathering hearts first for the last 2,000 years. Then he's going to restore our minds, our thinking process. Many of us are thinking different today than it's traditionally been taught over the centuries. We're seeing things. We're seeing the hearts of the fathers like we never saw them before. And then one day he'll simply say, come home. And then the body is the last thing that has to be restored. We call that a resurrection, and that will happen someday. But first, he's got to gather everything else up. But in the meantime, he already knows what's going to happen, especially in the first century, that not only are the two houses divided, but also we have his own people who are supposed to maintain the Torah. They have been adding things and taking things away from the Torah. So he warns us of that before he even says anything about building a church. The background is that his assembly is already divided. And that's the background of the reason he's saying these things. And then it says in verse 12, Matthew 16, verse 12, then understood they how he bade them to beware of the leaven of the bread. They didn't understand that, okay? But of the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. In other words, he's saying, beware of the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He wasn't really talking about bread. Verse 13, when Yeshua came to the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And they said, well, some say you are John the Baptist, some Elijah, others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And he said unto them, but who do you say that I am? This is very famous. We all know this. And Simon Peter, of course, answers and says, thou art the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Yeshua answered and said unto him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this unto you, but my Father which is in heaven. In other words, it's the Word of God that revealed this to you. It wasn't something that necessarily that some guy taught you or whatever. Why? Because the Pharisees and the Sadducees have been teaching leaven. And he just told them to beware of that. So it wasn't them, if you will, or the system or some person or some teaching or organization. It's the Father. And the Father is, if you will, the Word of God. And so it's the Word of God that revealed this to him through the Father. And so when we go back and we read the Word of God, we see that his assembly has been scattered and divided all over the world. And he's about to tell us, because of his death and resurrection, he's going to begin to gather them back together and restore them. Now, that's what he has in mind, because his people are among other pagan nations and worshiping all kinds of pagan gods. A multitude of pagan gods is where they find themselves right now as Yeshua is speaking. And that's essential too as we read on. It says, and I say unto you, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. We'll just leave it right there. Now, that's that famous statement in which all kinds of religious systems believe that Peter was them or the rock was them and so on and so forth. But I believe that there's a specific reason why we are told that they are at Caesarea Philippi. Because if you've ever been to Israel, what's at Caesarea Philippi is a place called Banyas. If you've ever been there, you'll know that it's dried up right now, but it is a very famous place where Yeshua said this. That's why the tour groups take them to this place, because that is where these things took place. And so when you look at this thing, you see that there used to be this a big, huge rock, and there's all kinds of pagan stuff on it and so forth. And water used to gush out. There was a time when water gushed out of that rock. And so when Yeshua, speaking of Peter, points to that rock, he says that this is where he will, I believe in the Greek and Hebrew, rebuild my church. Because if you look up this word oikodomeo, which is the word in Greek used there, it's bana in Hebrew, bana, and it's oikodomeo in the Greek. Either way, you can look it up in the dictionary. Either one can mean build or rebuild. Now, what would be the difference in this context of building and rebuilding? Well, context has a lot to do with it. And so he's already established the fact that to watch out for the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because they have divided themselves. They put up a middle wall that's going to be brought down in Ephesians chapter 2. They put up this wall that separates people, being a microcosmic picture of the people of God scattered all over the earth. And it's going to come down very soon, because he destroyed the middle wall of partition, which was contained in doctrine and commandments, which is dogma. We covered that earlier. It's not the Torah being talked about there. It's the dogma of the Pharisees is being talked about. And so this is going to eventually be removed. But in the meantime, they're scattered throughout all the earth, worshiping a multitude of other gods. And so he points to that rock, and he says, it's upon this place that I'm going to, I believe, rebuild my church. Why? Because rebuild is not only one of the meanings of the word used there, but contextually speaking, that's exactly historically what we are told and prophetically in the Bible was going to happen. So it fits the context and it fits the meaning of the word. Now, one of the interesting bits about this is that at the time that Yeshua said that place was not called Banyas. It was called Panias. P-A-N-I-A-S. It was called Panias, not Banyas. The reason why it's called Banyas today is because the Arabs took it over hundreds of years ago, and in the Arabic language, they do not have a P sound. And so they weren't able to express that pronunciation of Pontius, so they used the B sound. They did have a B sound. And that is a grammatical thing. It's a matter of linguistics because that happens all over the place. They're both labials. They're both called labials because they're pronounced with your lips. P, p. So B sounds are pronounced like P sounds. We pop them through our lips. But then it was called Pontius. Now Pontius means, the pan means all. And remember, they're worshiping all kinds of gods. So it was a place where the people came to worship a multitude of gods, is where this place was at. That was what this rock was all about. And that's exactly what had happened in the scattering of the 10 houses, particularly the 10 houses that went to the north, or 10 tribes that went to the north. They were scattered among all the other religious systems to worship a multitude of gods. Now Hosea tells us in Hosea chapter 1 that in the same place, I should read this. Hosea, in your English Bibles, it's in Hosea chapter 1, verse 10. The prophecy, remember, of Hosea's children, that I have scattered you, you are not my people, and I have no mercy on you. But then it's prophesying in the latter days that there will be a time when I will gather you. See, the first child meant scatter. God scatters. The second child meant no mercy, and the third one meant not my people. But then he prophesied in the latter days that you're going to regather them, and you're going to have mercy upon your people, and they will be your people once again. A very clear prophecy, which happens to unfold exactly the way Hosea said it when you get in the New Testament. And then you'll understand the New Testament when you go back to the Old Testament, understand all the prophetic pronouncements that are made and how they were fulfilled exactly the way he said they were going to be. Many have not been fulfilled yet. For example, we are not physically gathered back yet. We are still scattered all over the earth. Why? He's only restored our hearts, and he's restoring our minds. He hasn't restored our bodies yet. That's something for a future thing. I wish he would restore mine now. And some of you are probably saying the same thing. I could use a new one, okay? But nonetheless, it says, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea. Now, if we were just talking about only those people who come from the loins of Abraham, they're hardly in the multitudes like the sand of the sea and the stars of heaven. The reason why the Father uses that of Abraham, because he already knows that those who are of Abraham, of his faith, are those who are the Messiahs. And you are the Messiahs by faith, by trust in him. That's how you become the Messiahs. And so there's going to be a multitude of people join themselves with them. But when they do, the Father all calls them the same thing, because they're all his children living in his house. All he did, according to Isaiah chapter 54, was take the tents and stretch them out and move the stakes of the tent. If you read Isaiah chapter 54, verses 1 through 3, he took the stakes of the tent and said, move them out, because the children of the unmarried wife are going to come in with the children of the married wife. If you go back and read that and put these things together, you'll see that it's being fulfilled precisely the way he said it. And so he said, they cannot be measured or numbered. It shall come to pass that in that place where it was said unto them, ye are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, you are the sons of the living God, which is what Peter just called Yeshua. If you remember, before he says this thing about building my church, that's what he called Yeshua. And so when you get to the New Testament, the most dominant word used in the New Testament is sons of the living God, or children of God. That's the most dominant one, because he says that's what you shall be called. And so he said very clearly that in the same place where I scattered you is the same place where I'm going to gather you. And so when we get to this statement in Matthew chapter 16, verse 18, he pointing to that rock, which then was Pontius, picturing where all the tribes are scattered, worshiping a multitude of gods, all scattered all over the earth. And he points to that and says, this is the place where I'm going to rebuild. So it's the same. So the same place they're scattered is the same place he's going to begin the gathering and so forth. And so here we are, still scattered all over the earth. So I believe clearly the way that should be translated there is that this is the place where I will rebuild my assembly. And when did the rebuilding of the symbol. Why? Because it had been divided and it had fallen apart and it had been scattered all over the earth. And the Father knows how much power and strength His people have when we are united as one. But when we are scattered all over the place, that's when we have no unity and no real power of God in our lives, because we're scattered all over the earth. His desire, His passionate desire, is to bring His people back eventually into the land. But right now He wants us to be one here and here. So He gathers hearts first, and then He starts restoring our minds. That's what's been going on demonstratively for at least 20 years now. This regathering, this re-understanding, if you will, creating a new understanding through the Tanakh, not through, sitting in a field contemplating your belly button, but taking His people all of a sudden back to the beginning, as Malachi said would happen in the last verses of Malachi. In the latter days, I'm going to return the hearts of the fathers to the children and the heart of the children back to the fathers. So here we are learning more about the ancient fathers than we ever have before. Because when we were in the religious systems that we were raised in, we were just told a lot of stuff about the fathers. Most of us were raised with some kind of knowledge of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but we mainly just knew the stories of them. We didn't know their hearts and so forth, and now we're learning their hearts. And as a result, we're turning our hearts back to them as well. And so this is just one example where I believe that our current understanding, current theological understanding of that was forced into the text rather than taking the fullness of the text and bringing it into our culture. And I hope we go through a lot of this. So one of the things I need to do, because I've said this phrase, pin-headed theologians, several times, and pointy-headed intellectuals. And rather than just throwing out a general term and assuming that anybody who's been to Bible school or seminary is a pin-headed theologian, I'm not saying that. That's not what I'm saying. I want to give you an example of it. And the reason why I want to give this to you is because this is an example of how this works in the system. The language is not designed for you and I, the average person living on this earth, to really understand. It's like a whole club of their own. And they have a whole language system. They have a lingo, if you will, that they share with each other that is gobbledygook to most of us. And they just exchange things with each other. I believe they put out a lot of these lexicons and dictionaries and so forth. They're actually writing to each other. They're not really writing to you and me. If they were writing to you and me, I think they would use the language and expression that you and I would understand. But let me give you an example. And I want to kind of give you several examples. One in the rather mystical side of Judaism as well, called Kabbalah. All right? Something I get accused a lot of times of being a Kabbalist, believe it or not, because of my understanding of the language and so forth. And the Kabbalists teach a lot of that as well. But Kabbalists pray, and I'm not going to stop praying just because Kabbalists pray. I would not ever recommend that people dive headfirst into this. It's not something for somebody to really get into. But I want to give you an example of that kind of language, first starting from the mystical Jewish side of things. So I understand I'm trying to include everybody in this, not just picking on one group or another. Here's an example, and I quote, "The run of time and space defined by the past is reflected in the will of the soul. Faith, pleasure, and will correspond to the three heads of Keter, the superconscious as taught in Chassidut. In the terminology of Kabbalah, they were referred to as the unknowable head, the head of nothing, and the head of infinity, literally the head of the long face, respectively. Each head is the source of a level of consciousness in all the revealed powers of the soul. Each head lives in a particular state of time." Did you understand a word of that? Okay. I'm just submitting to you, I really don't think it's designed for you to understand a word of that. Let me give you another example. I'm going to go to quote from a typical, these are direct quotes, by the way, a typical Greek English lexicon. I don't want to name what they are because I don't want to offend anybody. But this is just another example. And I quote, "The meaning of radical words and of the component parts of compounds is added, except when it is indubitably suggested by the derivative, or when such words may be found in their proper place in the lexicon." Now, did you understand a word of that? Do you have any idea what they just said there? Oh, it gets worse. Let me give you another example. So, because I want to make sure everybody understands what I mean when I say this. This is from a very well-known analytical Greek lexicon. That's different from just a typical Greek lexicon. And I quote, "The most simple and ordinary use of the genitive is to place a substantive in the immediate construction with another substantive. This construction is an expression of some simple and obvious relation between the things signified by the two substantives. And thus the substantive in the genitive comes variously to signify a possessor, origin, cause, or matter, object." What? Once again, did that make any sense to you? I don't believe it's designed to. And finally, we've got to conclude one more because of the fact that Hebrews, the language that I teach, and I love is ancient Hebrew. That is, I don't teach modern Hebrew, but ancient Hebrew. Because of that, I wanted to give you a quote from a typical college-level Hebrew grammar course. All right, just to give you an example. And I quote, "In the syntax of the sentence, there is noticeably widespread use of nominal clauses and of assenteton in both paratactic and hypotactic structures. It is common to find logical subordination under the guise of a formally paratactic structure. Hypotactic constructions are normally introduced by a restricted number of particles." Once again, these are the examples of what I'm talking about. Now, the only reason I'm bringing this up now is because I see a very, and always have seen, a very clear connection between the religious system that we have in America. I'm talking about the system now. I'm not talking about any particular individual. And our political system in America. Right now, we're going through a very tough time with our administration that we're under right now with respect to trying to get bills passed concerning various subjects like health care. And they've got these, 1,000-page and 1,500-page and 1,300-page bills that they put together. Just a stack of papers about this high. And it's one thing to have to read through all the minutia of that. But as you read it, you'll notice that it makes absolutely no sense. It's written in legalese. It's not written for you and I to understand. So we have these people writing these bills that affect our lives every day, and they're using a kind of language that because it's just their little club. It's their little club language and so forth. And nobody can understand what it even says. You're not supposed to understand what it says. Why do they do that? Because then, if it's uncertain, if it's ambiguous, or really clear in exactly what they're saying, then they could make us do anything that they wanted to do. Rather than using the plain, simple, in-your-face language, they put it in such a way where people are going to argue about it later as to what it really means. And they can really use that to appropriate any kind of thing that they wanted to and foist it on the culture and the people in. And I believe, I hope I don't sound too offensive here, I believe the religious system for centuries has done the same thing. So they can foist on those who love the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and want to follow him with all kinds of doctrinal positions and so forth. And they can end up how do I say that again? I can't say it anymore. Theologizing. There, I got it, because I kind of made this word up, I think. Theologizing everything away. And so let's get back to the focus here. We're going to focus on the book of Acts once again, rather than the early church fathers. And we are going to talk about the doctrine of the Scriptures, or the teaching of the Scriptures, rather than the doctrine of even Christianity. The point, I believe when you and I stand before a powerful God one day, that he's not going to hold us accountable to how we responded to Judaism or Christianity or Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormon doctrine or whatever. We're going to hold accountable for how we responded to his Scriptures. That's what I believe that he's going to do. Now, one of the things I want to conclude this week with is the fact that the book of Acts is filled with idioms. These are idioms because I believe the New Testament was originally written in Hebrew. These idioms, as they are translated into the Aramaic and into the Greek, because of a huge part of the known world at that time was speaking those languages. So I believe that these people were taught these things in their own language, and they were immediately translated. We do that in America too. That's not a hard thing to understand. There's always an argument on what was the original language of the New Testament, and I believe that the circumstantial evidence points to Hebrew. Why do I say circumstantial evidence? Because the facts are that we do not have in our possession, nobody in the world right now knows, at least exposed, okay? We do not have the New Testament in any original handwriting at all. Probably one of the oldest manuscripts we have is the Chester Beatty Papyri of about 125 AD. So we don't have any first century, we don't have anything that says, love Paul, or sincerely Paul, or signed Paul, or anything like that. And so that means if we were in a court of law, we don't have a body, we don't have a murder weapon, and we don't have any eyewitnesses. They all passed away, all right? And so what does that mean? That means if we're going to convict that person, then we have to convict them on circumstantial evidence, because we don't have the three things that we need, a body, a murder weapon, and an eyewitness. And so we have to convict on circumstantial evidence. I believe the circumstantial evidence, it leans more heavily to Hebrew, and especially since the Dead Sea Scrolls. From the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls and archaeology in Israel, particularly in the last 30 or 40 years, we've been continuing to dig up much evidence out of the ground, buried in the ground, of the fact that people in the first century in Jerusalem were speaking a Hebrew a lot more than we traditionally thought. It was just understood based upon the evidence that we had in the past, that because we didn't have much evidence of this, that we believe that the New Testament was originally written in Greek, because that's what we have 23,000 plus manuscripts of the New Testament. 23,000 plus manuscripts we have of extant manuscripts, or existing ones, all basically written in Greek and some Aramaic and some Ethiopic and Coptic and so forth languages, but we have a multitude of those. So the assumption, based upon what? Circumstantial evidence, is that the New Testament was originally written in Greek. But now we're receiving a lot more evidence, and we're starting with the fact that these people spoke this language a lot more than we thought they did, because we assumed that only the rabbis spoke Hebrew. Everybody else is speaking Latin, Aramaic, and Greek, and that only the rabbis, only a small handful of rabbis in their synagogues, on Shabbat, doing their Torah portions, were actually speaking Hebrew. But now we know better than that. We found coins and wills and gravestones and so forth, the things that common everyday people use. We found invoices, if you will, contracts between average people in the first century in a transaction. Somebody bought something from somebody and so forth. And then we have gravestones of the average person, all written in Hebrew. So we have a lot more evidence today than we did back then. And that's the simple fact of it. But nonetheless, they had to translate this into Aramaic and Greek, because that was some of the more dominant languages also spoken at that time. And so in order to get it out, just like they would have to do today, to get out to the Spanish-speaking people, we have to translate into Spanish and so forth. And so that's what they had to do then. In order to do that, here's the problem. Idiomatic phrases are difficult sometimes to translate into a receiving language. And so we're going to cover some of those, and I'm going to give you some examples of ones that we have in our culture right now, and then I'm going to show you, using the same sort of common sense and logic, they had to deal with the same kind of problem in the first and second centuries in these translations as well, because this is an important background before we get into the book of Acts. That's what we're going to continue with next week. And so, in the meantime, cling to your roots, that your days may be long, and that you will prosper in everything you set your hand to do. See you next time. Shalom Aleichem.